I held the hardcover of my debut novel, Echoes of Tomorrow, as the photographer adjusted his lens. The weight of it felt surreal. 1 million copies sold in 3 months, a movie deal pending, my face on the cover of Time magazine as the voice of a generation. Can you look more natural? The photographer asked. You seem tense. I wasn't tense. I was thinking about my brother Marcus, who at this very moment sat in a maximum security psychiatric facility 2 states away, his brain so damaged by the experimental drugs he'd taken that he could no longer read. The doctor said he'd never read again. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. I'm fine, I said, smiling for the camera, just remembering something funny. What I was remembering was the last time I'd shown Marcus my poetry 3 years ago in my first life. I'd been 17, sitting at the kitchen table with my worn notebook, the one with the purple cover I'd filled with poems and short stories. He'd snatched it from my hands, flipped through it with theatrical disgust, and then read one of my poems aloud in a mocking, high-pitched voice while our parents laughed. The stars weep silver tears for dreams unrealized, he'd recited, barely able to contain his laughter. My heart, a caged bird, yearns for skies unknown. He'd thrown the notebook at me. This is garbage, Lily, melodramatic garbage. You'll never be a real writer. You don't have talent, you have delusions. My father had clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. Marcus is right, sweetheart. Writing is a hobby, not a career. Good thing Marcus will take over the business. At least one of you has practical skills. My mother had said nothing, just returned to cutting vegetables, her silence in agreement. I'd cried that night, hidden under my blankets, holding that notebook to my chest. I'd cried and told myself they were wrong, that I did have talent, that someday I'd prove it to them. But that someday never came. Not in my first life. In my first life, I died at 23. The flashback hit me like it always did, vivid and sharp, more like a memory than something from a past life. I was lying in a hospital bed, my body weak from the pneumonia that had ravaged my lungs. My family hadn't visited in weeks. Marcus had been too busy with his startup, the one using money my grandmother had left to both of us. Money he'd convinced me to invest in his company, money I'd never see again. My parents were on a cruise, celebrating their anniversary, unable to cut it short, even when the doctors said I was critical. I died alone at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, thinking about all the stories I'd never written, all the words trapped inside me that would disappear with my last breath. And then I woke up. I was 14 again, lying in my childhood bed, sunlight streaming through the window. My phone showed September 3rd, 2019. I'd gone back 9 years. The first thing I did was cry. The second thing I did was grab a notebook and start writing everything I remembered. Stock market crashes, cryptocurrency rises, pandemic timelines, technology releases, book trends, movie successes. Every piece of knowledge that might give me an advantage. The third thing I did was realize that my family's cruelty had started long before I was 17. It had always been there, subtle and insidious. My childhood was a study in favoritism disguised as fairness. Marcus was 3 years older than me, and from the moment he was born, he was the golden child. Not because he was particularly special, he was average in every way that mattered, but because he was a boy and in our family that was enough. My father, Richard Chen, ran a moderately successful import-export business. He'd always envisioned his son taking over, building an empire, making the Chen name legendary. My existence was an afterthought, a daughter who'd be married off eventually, someone who needed to learn to be practical and realistic. My mother, Susan, was a homemaker who'd given up her own dreams to support my father's business. She'd once wanted to be a teacher, but her parents had pushed her toward marriage instead. She'd learned to swallow her disappointments, and she'd taught me to do the same. Marcus learned early that he could do no wrong. When he broke my toys, it was an accident. When he copied my homework, he was studying. When he took credit for my science fair project in 8th grade, the one I'd spent months on, the one about renewable energy that won first place, my parents had beamed with pride at their son's ingenuity. Lily helped a little, Marcus had said, magnanimous in victory, while I stood beside him, invisible. The project won him a scholarship to a prestigious high school. I got a pat on the head and a reminder to support your brother. But it was my writing that bore the brunt of their cruelty. Every story I shared was too fanciful. Every poem was overly emotional. Every dream of being an author was met with concerned looks and gentle corrections toward practical careers like accounting or nursing. Writers starve, my father said regularly. The world doesn't need more stories, it needs people who do real work. Marcus absorbed these lessons and amplified them. He mocked me relentlessly, always with our parents' tacit approval. My notebooks went missing. My laptop mysteriously broke before a school writing competition. The one time a teacher submitted my short story to a youth literature magazine and it won second place, Marcus told everyone at school I'd plagiarized it. The rumor stuck. The magazine never published my piece. I learned to write in secret, to hide my notebooks, to dream quietly. In my first life, this had continued through high school and into college. I'd studied business at my father's insistence, writing on the side, submitting to magazines under a pseudonym. I'd gotten a few pieces published in small literary journals, nothing substantial. After graduation, I'd worked at my father's company, a glorified assistant, while Marcus rose through the ranks despite his mediocre performance. Then grandmother May had died when I was 22, leaving her estate to be split equally between Marcus and me. $200,000 each. It was supposed to be my escape fund, my chance to finally pursue writing full-time. But Marcus had come to me with his business plan, his startup idea for a new logistics platform. He'd needed investment. He'd promised returns, partnerships, equality, and I, still desperate for family approval, still hoping that supporting him might finally earn me their love, had given him everything. The company failed within a year. Marcus blamed the market, bad timing, unforeseen circumstances. My money was gone. He'd used it for his lifestyle, a luxury apartment, a sports car, expensive dinners to impress investors who never materialized. When I'd confronted him, he'd laughed. You were stupid enough to give it to me. That's your fault, not mine. My parents had sided with him. Marcus was trying to build something. You should have known the risks. Don't be bitter just because you made a bad investment. 6 months later, I'd caught pneumonia. I was weak, struggling, couldn't afford proper treatment because I'd given everything to Marcus. My family couldn't be bothered to care. I died with nothing, no money, no published books, no family who loved me, no legacy except regret. But now at 14, I had something more valuable than money or talent. I had knowledge, I had time, and I had a rage that had been forged in the loneliness of a hospital room where I'd died unloved and unmourned. I spent the first few months after my rebirth observing my family with new eyes. I saw the patterns clearly now, how my mother always gave Marcus the larger portion at dinner, how my father's voice warmed when he spoke to his son, how they both glazed over when I spoke about my interests. I saw how Marcus had learned to manipulate them, playing the dutiful son while being cruel to me in private. I also started writing again, but differently this time. I knew what readers wanted. I'd spent years in my first life reading bestseller lists, following literary trends, watching what captured audiences. I knew that young adult dystopian fiction was about to explode. I knew that romantasy would dominate in a few years. I knew which themes resonated, which tropes sold, which voices cut through the noise. At 14, I started my first novel. Not the pretentious literary fiction I'd attempted before, but a gripping YA thriller about a girl who discovers her perfect family is hiding dark secrets. I wrote it in 3 months, during every stolen moment. Early mornings before school, late nights after homework, weekends when my family ignored me. I titled it Behind the Mask. I also started a blog under the pen name Elena Winters, posting short fiction and poetry. Knew which platforms would explode, which communities to cultivate, which influencers to engage with before they became famous. Within 6 months, I had 10,000 followers. Within a year, 50,000. I was 15 when I finished Behind the Mask. I queried agents using every piece of industry knowledge I'd accumulated. Which agents were looking for what, how to write a killer query letter, when to submit. I got 7 offers of representation within 2 weeks. My family knew nothing about any of this. At home, I played the role of the dutiful, overlooked daughter. I worked hard at school but never outshined Marcus, who attended the prestigious Westfield Academy on the scholarship my science project had earned him. I helped with chores, I stayed quiet. I made myself small, but I was building an empire in secret. My agent, Sarah Chen, no relation, was a powerhouse in New York publishing. She'd loved Behind the Mask and saw its potential immediately. This is going to be big, she'd said on our first phone call. You have a voice that's raw and authentic. Readers will connect with this. She sold the book at auction to one of the big five publishers for a six-figure deal. I was 15 years old. The announcement appeared in Publishers Weekly under the name Elena Winters. My family didn't read Publishers Weekly. I told my parents I'd gotten a part-time job at a bookstore to explain the money that would eventually come in. They barely reacted. Marcus was taking advanced business classes and dating a girl from a wealthy family. I was furniture. The money from the book deal went into a secret bank account under my legal name, but in a different bank than my family used. I was careful, paranoid even, about keeping my two lives separate. Elena Winters was building a career. Lily Chen was the invisible daughter. Behind the Mask, published when I was 16, timed perfectly for the summer market. It debuted at number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. I still remember the day I saw the list. I was in my room, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the rankings online. Number 7. My book, my words. Thousands of people were reading my story, connecting with my protagonist, feeling seen by what I'd created. I cried, but silently, my face pressed into my pillow so no one would hear. Downstairs, Marcus was celebrating his acceptance to an Ivy League university. My parents had invited relatives over. There was champagne and cake and endless praise for their brilliant son. No one knocked on my door to include me. That night, at the dinner table, my father asked what I was planning to do with my future. Maybe writing, I said quietly, testing the waters with the truth hidden in plain sight. Marcus snorted. Still on about that? Dad, remember those terrible poems she used to write? My father chuckled. Writing isn't a career, Lily. We've discussed this. But what if someone could make money from writing? I pressed. What if someone wrote a bestseller? The chances of that are 1 in a million, my mother said, her voice kind but dismissive. You need a backup plan, sweetie. Something stable. Marcus is going to Yale, my father added. He'll take over the business eventually. Maybe you can work with him. He'll need support staff. Support staff? For my brother. Using my science project scholarship, attending my dream school. I smiled and nodded. Maybe. In my room that night, I checked my royalty statement. Behind the Mask had earned me $40,000 in the first month. Movie studios were circling. My agent was fielding offers for my next book. I was already more successful than my father's business had ever been, and my family didn't know I existed in the literary world. The invisibility that had once hurt me was now my greatest weapon. The turning point came 6 months later, on my 17th birthday. My family forgot. It wasn't deliberate cruelty. That would have required them to think about me enough to hurt me intentionally. They simply forgot. My father was traveling for business. My mother was helping Marcus apartment hunt in New Haven. Marcus himself was at a pre-orientation event at Yale. I woke up on my 17th birthday to an empty house and silence. In my first life, this had broken me. I'd cried for hours, then pulled myself together and pretended it didn't matter when they apologized days later with a grocery store cake and distracted smiles. But this time, I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table eating cereal, and I made a decision. I was done protecting them from the consequences of their cruelty. I was done being invisible. I was done pretending their approval mattered. It was time for Elena Winters to step out of the shadows, and it was time for my family to learn exactly who I was. But I wouldn't tell them. That would be too easy, too kind. I would make them watch as Elena Winters became so famous, so successful, so undeniably brilliant that they couldn't avoid her. I would make them read articles about this mysterious young author. I would make them watch interviews, see billboards, hear her name everywhere. And then, when I was so successful they couldn't deny my talent, when Elena Winters was a household name, I would reveal that she was me. That Lily Chen, the daughter they dismissed, the sister who was mocked, was the writer they'd said could never succeed. But there was another layer to my revenge, one that would require careful timing. I knew what was coming for Marcus. In my first life, he'd thrived at Yale for 2 years, then fallen in with a bad crowd. He'd started taking stimulants to handle the academic pressure, first prescription medications, then harder stuff. By his junior year, he'd been addicted to a cocktail of substances. He'd hidden it well, maintaining his grades through sheer desperation and pharmaceutical enhancement. But then he'd discovered research chemicals, unregulated synthetic drugs purchased from overseas labs. He'd thought he was being smart, biohacking his brain for peak performance. He'd thought he was invincible. The drugs had destroyed him. By the time he was 25 in my first life, he'd suffered permanent neurological damage. His memory was shot. His cognitive function was impaired. He could barely hold a conversation, let alone read a book. My parents had been devastated, bankrupting themselves trying to find treatments, experimental therapies, anything to restore their golden boy. In my first life, I'd felt sorry for him despite everything. I'd visited him in the facility, read to him, shown him patience he'd never shown me. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't intervene. I wouldn't warn him. I would let Marcus make every choice that led to his destruction, and I would watch with clear eyes as karma delivered justice more thorough than anything I could engineer. And when his brain was too damaged to read, when he sat in that facility, unable to string together complex thoughts, I would make sure he knew that his little sister, the one he'd mocked, the one whose poetry he'd laughed at, had become everything he'd told her she'd never be. He would know. He just wouldn't be able to comprehend it anymore. The next 2 years were a blur of calculated moves. Behind the Mask became a phenomenon. It hit #1 on the bestseller list and stayed there for 23 weeks. Foreign rights sold in 47 countries. A major streaming service bought the adaptation rights for 8 figures. Teenagers posted quotes from it all over social media. Adults praised its nuanced portrayal of family trauma. Critics called it the defining voice of a generation. Elena Winters became a sensation. At 18, I published my second novel, Shattered Mirrors, a psychological thriller that was even more successful than the first. It debuted at #1. I did my first major interview with a morning show, appearing via video call with my face partially obscured, claiming I was shy and wanted my work to speak for itself. The mystery of Elena Winters only heightened interest. My third book, The Truth Beneath, came out when I was 19. By then, I'd sold 10 million copies total. I'd won major awards. I'd been featured in every significant publication. Oprah had put my second book on her book club list. I was the most successful author under 30 in the world, and at home, my family still had no idea. I'd moved out at 18, renting a penthouse apartment in Manhattan near my publisher's offices. I told my parents I'd gotten a scholarship to NYU and would be living in a dorm. They'd barely looked up from their dinner. "That's nice, dear," my mother had said. Marcus had already crashed out of Yale by then. He'd made it to his junior year before the inevitable happened. He'd been taking increasingly dangerous combinations of nootropics and research chemicals. Convinced he was optimizing his brain, instead, he was destroying it. The first major incident happened at a fraternity party. He'd had a seizure, collapsed, spent 3 days in the hospital. The doctors had found a cocktail of substances in his system and warned him about the dangers. My parents had been terrified, hovering over their golden boy, sure it was just a one-time mistake. But I knew it wasn't. In my first life, I'd watched this same pattern unfold. Marcus was already too far gone, too addicted to the performance edge the drugs gave him, too convinced of his own invincibility. He'd gone back to using within weeks. He'd just gotten better at hiding it. I watched from a distance as my family imploded around Marcus's addiction. My father tried to fix it with money, paying for the best rehabs, the best therapists. My mother tried to fix it with love, making excuses, enabling him. Marcus tried to fix it with more drugs, chasing the high that would make everything okay again. None of it worked. By the time I was 20, Marcus had dropped out of Yale and was living at home, ostensibly working for my father's business, but barely functional. His memory was already degrading. He'd have conversations and forget them hours later. He'd make plans and not show up. He'd rage at my parents, then sob and apologize, then forget he'd done either. The family business was struggling too. My father had poured so much money into Marcus's treatment that he'd neglected the company. Competitors had moved in, profit margins had shrunk. The company that was supposed to be Marcus's legacy was crumbling, and through it all, I built my empire. By the time I was 21, Elena Winters had published 5 best-selling novels. I'd expanded into other genres, adult literary fiction, memoir-style essays, even poetry. My poetry collection, Words Unsaid, was a surprise hit, praised for its raw emotional honesty and beautiful imagery. The same kind of poetry Marcus had once mocked was now selling hundreds of thousands of copies. I'd been careful to keep Lily Chen separate from Elena Winters. At home, on the rare occasions I visited, I was still the quiet daughter studying at NYU. I'd told my parents I was majoring in business, that I worked part-time at a bookstore, that I was living a normal, unremarkable life. They'd never asked for details. They were too consumed with Marcus's deterioration. But I knew the revelation was coming soon. I could feel it building, the perfect moment when everything would align. That moment came on a Tuesday in October, 3 months after my 21st birthday. Elena Winters was scheduled to appear on The Late Show. It would be my first full face reveal interview. For years, I'd maintained mystery, giving interviews via video call or in shadow, claiming privacy was important to me. The intrigue had only increased my fame. But now, I was ready. My publisher had convinced me it was time and said, "The world wants to know you," Sarah had said. "Let them see you." The timing was perfect for another reason. That same week, Marcus had his final breakdown. He'd been taking an experimental cognitive enhancer he'd ordered from an unlicensed lab in Eastern Europe. The chemical had interacted catastrophically with the other substances in his system. He'd collapsed in my father's office, seizing, foam coming from his mouth. By the time the ambulance arrived, he'd suffered severe brain damage. The doctor said he'd survive, but his cognitive function was permanently impaired. He could speak in simple sentences. He could perform basic tasks, but complex thought, reading comprehension, abstract reasoning, all of that was gone. He was 24 years old and his mind was destroyed. My parents were shattered. My father closed the business, unable to focus on anything but his son. My mother spent her days at the facility where Marcus lived, reading to him, showing him pictures, trying to spark something, anything, in his damaged brain. They didn't read to him from my books, of course. They didn't know those were mine. Not yet. The night of my Late Show appearance, I sat in the green room, applying my makeup, my hands steady. I wore a deep blue dress, elegant and sophisticated. My hair was styled in loose waves. I looked like a successful author. I looked like someone who'd achieved her dreams. I looked nothing like the invisible daughter my family barely noticed. The producer came in. 5 minutes, Elena, you ready? I smiled. I'm ready. I debated telling my family to watch. Part of me wanted them to see it live, to experience the shock in real time, but I decided against it. Better to let the revelation happen organically, to let them stumble across it and realize slowly, with dawning horror, who I'd become. Besides, I'd already sent them something that would arrive tomorrow. A package containing my entire collection of books, each one signed "With Love, Lily" in my distinctive handwriting. The host, James Corden, greeted me warmly as I walked onto the set. The audience applauded. I smiled and waved, comfortable in the spotlight. "Elena Winters," James said, shaking my hand. "Finally, we get to see the mysterious author who's taken the world by storm. How does it feel to finally step into the light?" "Terrifying," I admitted, laughing, "but also freeing. I've hidden for so long, it's time to be seen." We talked about my books, my process, my influences. I was articulate, charming, funny. The audience loved me. Then James asked the question I'd been waiting for "You've been very private about your personal life. Can you tell us a bit about your background? Where did this incredible writer come from?" I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. I grew up in a family that didn't believe in my dreams. They told me writing was impractical, that I'd never succeed, that I should focus on more realistic goals. "And look at you now," James said. "What do they think of your success?" My smile widened. "They don't know yet, but they will soon." The audience gasped, intrigued. "You mean your family doesn't know you're Elena Winters?" "They know I write," I said carefully. "They just don't know I'm successful. They stopped paying attention to me a long time ago. So I built this entire career without them knowing. And tomorrow, they're going to find out exactly who their daughter became while they weren't looking." The audience erupted in applause and cheers. James looked delighted by the drama. "That's incredible," he said. "What made you decide to reveal yourself now?" I thought about Marcus sitting in his facility room, his brain too damaged to understand complex concepts, to read books, to comprehend what he'd lost. "Timing," I said simply. "Everything has its perfect moment." The interview went viral overnight. Clips of it circulated on every social media platform. The mystery of Elena Winters was solved. She was a 21-year-old author who'd hidden her success from her unsupportive family for 7 years. The internet loved the narrative. Articles proliferated. Elena Winters' shocking family secret. The author who succeeded in secret. How Elena Winters built an empire while her family wasn't watching. My book sales tripled, and the next morning, my parents received the package. My mother called first. I was in my Manhattan apartment drinking coffee, watching the sunrise over the city. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Lily? Her voice was strange, thick with confusion. I don't understand. We got this package. Are these your books? Did you write these? Yes, I said simply. Silence. Then, but you're Elena Winters? Yes. But that's impossible. Elena Winters is famous. She's been on the news. You can't be. I am, I said, my voice calm. I've been publishing books since I was 15. I've sold 20 million copies worldwide. I've won awards. I've been interviewed by Oprah. And you didn't notice because you weren't paying attention. I could hear her breathing rapid and shallow. Lily, Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked. Would you have supported me? Or would you have told me to focus on practical things, to stop being delusional, to support Marcus instead? She didn't answer. I watched the interview, she said finally, her voice small. Last night, I saw you on James Corden. I thought that girl looked familiar, but I didn't believe. Lily, why didn't you tell us? Because you didn't deserve to know, I said. You don't get to celebrate my success when you spent years telling me I'd fail. You don't get to be proud of me now when you couldn't be bothered to care about me then. That's not fair, she whispered. We love you. We've always loved you. You love the idea of a daughter, I corrected. You never loved me. You loved Marcus. Everything was always about Marcus, and now look where that got you. I heard her sob, but I felt nothing. In my first life, her tears would have broken me. I would have apologized, backtracked, made myself small to comfort her. Not anymore. I have to go, I said. I have an interview with Vogue. I hung up. My father called an hour later. His voice was hard, defensive. Your mother is very upset. I imagine so, I said, because you've been lying to us for years, living a secret life. Do you have any idea how that makes us feel? Do you have any idea how it felt to be invisible in my own family? I countered. To have my dreams mocked? To watch you pour all your love and resources into Marcus while I might as well not have existed? That's not true. We treated you both equally. I laughed, actually laughed. Dad, Marcus stole my science project and you celebrated him for it. He used my grandmother's inheritance to fund a vanity project and you defended him. You forgot my 17th birthday. Don't talk to me about equality. We made mistakes, he admitted. But you're our daughter. You should have told us about your success. We would have supported you. No, you wouldn't have. You would have found ways to diminish it, to make it about Marcus, to convince me to give you money for his treatments. I know exactly how this would have gone. Silence. Long enough that I almost thought he'd hung up. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Nothing, I said honestly. I don't need anything from you. I haven't needed you for years. I just wanted you to know what you missed. I wanted you to understand what you could have had if you'd bothered to see me. Lily. My next book dedicates a chapter to family betrayal, I interrupted. It's about a girl whose family's neglect nearly destroys her, but she rises above it and succeeds despite them. Critics are calling it my most powerful work yet. It publishes in 3 months. I thought you should know. I hung up. Marcus never called. He couldn't. His brain couldn't process complex emotions or formulate coherent responses to abstract concepts. But my mother told me later that she'd shown him the books, tried to explain who I'd become. He'd looked at the covers, touched the pages, but nothing registered. The synapses that would have allowed him to understand, to feel regret or pride or anything beyond basic emotions, those were gone, burned away by the chemicals he'd pumped into his system. He would spend the rest of his life in that facility, unable to comprehend the irony that the sister he'd mocked had become everything he'd promised himself he'd be. And I was glad. That realization sat heavy in my chest, but I didn't shy away from it. I was glad he couldn't read my books. I was glad he would never understand what I'd achieved. I was glad he was trapped in the ruins of his own arrogance while I soared. Maybe that made me cruel. Maybe it made me vengeful. But I died alone in my first life, dismissed and forgotten, and I'd earned this victory. The weeks after the revelation were chaos. My family tried to reconcile, to rebuild bridges they'd burned without realizing it. My mother called weekly, leaving tearful voicemails about regret and love. My father sent emails about being proud, about wanting to make amends. I ignored most of them. I did visit Marcus once, 2 months after my interview. My mother had begged me to come, said he asked about me sometimes, said maybe seeing me would help. I doubted that, but I went anyway. The facility was nice, expensive, pastoral, the kind of place you'd send someone you loved and wanted comfortable but couldn't care for yourself. Marcus's room was bright, filled with puzzles and simple books, things designed for the cognitive level of a young child. He was sitting by the window when I entered, staring out at the gardens. At 24, he looked older, his face gaunt, his eyes distant. "Marcus?" I said softly. He turned, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition. "Lily, little sister." "That's right," I said, sitting across from him. "You right," he said slowly, struggling with the words. "Mom showed me. Books. Many books." "Yes," I said. "I'm a writer, a successful one." He nodded, but I could see the concept sliding off him, too abstract to grasp. "That's nice." "Do you remember mocking my poetry?" I asked. I knew he didn't, but I needed to say it. "Do you remember telling me I'd never be a real writer?" His brow furrowed, confused. "Did I? I don't remember." "I know," I said. "You don't remember a lot of things now." He looked at me, and something in his expression shifted, a shadow of awareness, of loss. "I was mean before?" "Yes," I said simply. "Sorry," he whispered. "Don't remember, but sorry." And that was the most heartbreaking thing. He couldn't remember what he'd done, couldn't comprehend what he'd lost, couldn't even understand why I might hate him. His cruelty had been erased along with everything else that made him who he was. I should have felt satisfied. I'd imagined this moment in various ways over the years, confronting him with his failures, making him see what his arrogance had cost him. But sitting there, looking at this shell of my brother, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not anger. Just empty. "I forgive you," I said finally, not because he deserved it, but because holding onto that anger was exhausting. "But I'm not staying in your life. You don't get to have me now that you can't hurt me anymore." He nodded, accepting this with the simplicity of someone who couldn't understand complex loss. "Okay." I left without looking back. My 6th novel, The Price of Gold, published 3 months later. It was my most autobiographical work, a searing examination of family dynamics, favoritism, and the cost of being invisible. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece. It won the National Book Award. In the dedication, I wrote, "To everyone who was told they weren't enough, you are. To everyone whose family couldn't see them, I see you. To everyone who succeeded despite being dismissed, this is your triumph too." I didn't mention my family by name. I didn't need to. The book spoke for itself. It sold 15 million copies in the first year. At 22, I was invited to speak at my old high school. They wanted to celebrate their famous alumna, to show current students that dreams were achievable. I almost said no. Going back felt like reopening old wounds. But then I thought about my 17-year-old self. sitting alone in her room on her forgotten birthday, believing her family's assessment of her worth. I said yes. The gymnasium was packed. Students, teachers, local press, everyone wanted to hear Elena Winters speak. I stood at the podium in a designer dress, my 5 best-selling novels displayed on a table beside me, and looked out at the sea of faces. I was invisible here, I began. Not literally, obviously. I attended classes, turned in homework, participated when required, but I was invisible in the ways that mattered. My dreams were dismissed as impractical, my talents were seen as hobbies, not potential. My ambitions were treated as delusions. The room was silent. I had a teacher here, Miss Rodriguez, who told me I had a gift for writing. She was the only adult who encouraged me. She submitted my story to a competition without telling me, and when it won, she fought for me when someone started a rumor that I'd plagiarized it. I saw Mrs. Rodriguez in the audience, older now, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Rodriguez believed in me when no one else did. She saw me when I was invisible. And I want to say thank you, because that belief, even from one person, can change everything. The audience applauded. Mrs. Rodriguez stood, and we embraced while cameras flashed. After the speech, students lined up for autographs. They shared their own stories of being dismissed, overlooked, told they weren't good enough. I signed books and listened and told them what I wished someone had told me. Your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. Success isn't permission granted by people who don't believe in you. You don't need their approval to be extraordinary. A girl near the end of the line, maybe 15, clutched a worn notebook. My family says writing isn't a real career, she whispered. They want me to be a doctor. I looked at her notebook, saw the purple cover, and something in my chest twisted. What's your name? I asked. Sarah. Sarah, can I see your notebook? She handed it over, nervous. I flipped through it. Poems, short stories, character sketches. Raw but promising, full of the kind of emotion that can't be taught. This is good, I said. Really good. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But what if they're right? What if I'm not talented enough? Then you work harder, I said. Talent is just the starting point. Persistence, discipline, constant improvement, that's what makes a writer. But Sarah, listen to me. You are talented. I can see it in these pages, and even if your family can't see it now, that doesn't make it less true. I pulled out my phone. Give me your email. I'm going to send you some resources, workshops, competitions, online communities, and I want you to email me in 6 months with an update on your writing. Will you do that? She nodded, crying, and I hugged her. Over her shoulder, I saw my mother standing at the back of the gymnasium watching. We made eye contact. She looked older, worn down by the last few years. I felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness exactly, but a softening. She'd been a victim of her own conditioning, trapped by expectations that had crushed her own dreams before teaching her to crush mine. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. After the line cleared, she approached. Lily, that was beautiful. Thank you, I said formally. I wanted you to know I've been reading your books, all of them. I understand now what we missed. What I missed. Okay, I said, non-committal. Can we have coffee sometime? Just to talk? I considered this. Part of me wanted to say no to maintain the walls I'd built, but another part, the part that remembered the girl I'd been, desperate for her mother's love, was tired of carrying that weight. Maybe, I said. I'll think about it. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility. At 23, the age I'd died in my first life, I stood in my Manhattan penthouse, holding my 7th book, looking out at the city lights. I'd exceeded every goal I'd set for myself. I was wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined. I was critically acclaimed, commercially successful, culturally relevant. I was happy. That realization hit me with surprising force. Despite everything, the family betrayal, the years of invisibility, the pain of being dismissed, I was genuinely happy. I'd built a life on my own terms. I'd proven everyone wrong. I'd turned my invisibility into power, my dismissal into motivation, my pain into art that resonated with millions. And Marcus would spend the rest of his life unable to comprehend what I'd achieved. He'd never read my poetry, never understand the words he'd once mocked. He'd never grasped the irony that the sister he'd belittled had become the writer he'd promised he'd never allow her to be. Some might say he'd already paid enough, that his condition was punishment beyond anything deserved. But I remembered dying alone in a hospital bed, unmourned and unvisited. I remembered years of casual cruelty, of systematic dismissal, of being erased from my own family's consciousness. Marcus's fate wasn't my revenge, it was simply karma completing its work. My 8th book, After the Fall, was announced for publication when I was 24. It was billed as my most ambitious work yet, a multi-generational saga about family betrayal and the long process of healing from childhood wounds. The advance was record-breaking. The film rights sold before publication. Pre-orders exceeded everything I'd done before. And the day the announcement went live, my phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Lily Chen? An older woman's voice, cultured and warm. Yes? My name is Margaret Winters. I'm your grandmother, your father's mother. I froze. My father's family had been estranged for decades, a rift I'd never fully understood. I'd never met any of them. I saw you on television, she continued. I've read all your books, and I realize my granddaughter has become extraordinary while I wasn't part of her life. I'd like to change that if you're willing. Why now? I asked. Because I'm 83 years old, and I've wasted enough time on family pride and old grudges. Because you deserve to know you have family who sees you, who's proud of you, who understands what it means to be underestimated as a woman in this family. Something in her voice resonated. Tell me more. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her own dreams of being a writer, crushed by a generation that believed women should be wives and mothers, nothing more. She told me about fighting with my grandfather about it, the arguments that had eventually destroyed their marriage. She told me about watching my father absorb his father's misogyny, about trying and failing to prevent him from passing those beliefs to his children. I should have tried harder, she said. I should have been there for you. You're here now, I said. And for the first time in either of my lives, I felt like I had family who truly saw me. My 25th birthday was nothing like my 17th. I threw a party in my penthouse, friends from the publishing world, writers I admired, my agent, my editor. Margaret flew in from Boston. Mrs. Rodriguez came from Connecticut. Even Sarah, the girl with the purple notebook, attended. She'd won a young writers competition I'd sponsored. My parents weren't invited. Neither was Marcus. That night, surrounded by people who celebrated me, who saw me, who loved the person I'd become, I felt the ghost of my first life finally fade. I'd been given a second chance, and I hadn't wasted it. I'd turned pain into power, dismissal into determination, invisibility into a voice that reached millions. And Marcus sat in his facility room, unable to read, unable to comprehend, forever locked out of understanding the sister he'd underestimated. He'd laughed at my poetry once. Now my books were studied in universities, quoted in weddings, treasured by readers around the world. They'd outlive both of us, my words surviving long after we were gone. He'd never read a single one. The irony was perfect. The justice was complete. And I was finally, truly free. Years later, when I was 32 and had published 15 novels, won a Pulitzer, and been named one of Time's 100 most influential people, a journalist asked me about my estrangement from my family. Your brother Marcus has been in a care facility for years, she said carefully. Do you ever think about reconciling? I considered the question. I'd stopped hating Marcus years ago. Hate required energy I preferred to spend creating. My brother made choices that destroyed him, I said finally. And before those choices destroyed his mind, he made choices that hurt me. I don't hate him, but I don't owe him my presence either. Some people say your portrayal of family betrayal in your books is too harsh, she pressed, that you should be more forgiving. I smiled. The people who say that are the ones who've never been dismissed by the people supposed to love them. They're the ones who've never had their dreams mocked, their talents belittled, their existence erased. It's easy to preach forgiveness when you've never needed to fight for basic recognition from your own family. So, You don't believe in forgiveness? I believe in consequences, I said. I believe in people earning what they get. And I believe that success isn't just about achieving your dreams, it's about proving wrong everyone who said you couldn't. The interview went viral. Half the internet called me cold and unforgiving. The other half called me a truth teller, someone brave enough to say what others only thought. I didn't care about either response. I'd stopped performing for others' approval the day I died alone in a hospital bed. On my 35th birthday, I published my autobiography, Invisible: How I Became the Writer They Said I'd Never Be. It was my most personal work, detailing my first life, my death, my rebirth, and the journey to success despite my family's dismissal. I dedicated it to everyone who was told they weren't enough and to the one person who never stopped believing, myself. The book spent 73 weeks at #1 on the bestseller list. It became required reading in creative writing programs and family therapy courses. It sparked a cultural conversation about family dynamics, favoritism, and the long-term impact of parental dismissal. And Marcus, now 41 years old and still unable to read complex text, would never understand that his mockery had fueled the very success he'd promised would never come. My mother called after the book released. We'd developed a tentative relationship over the years, careful, boundaried, nothing like a typical mother-daughter bond, but more than the nothing we'd had. I read the autobiography, she said. It was hard to see myself through your eyes. I imagine so, I said. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive us? I thought about this. Forgiveness isn't a switch, Mom. It's a process. And honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever get there completely. But I've let go of the anger. That's something. Is it enough? It has to be, I said, because this is all I have to give. We hung up cordially, the conversation pleasant but distant, which was exactly what our relationship had become. Not hostile, but not close. Functional, but not fulfilling. It was enough. At 40, I was invited to speak at Yale, the university Marcus had attended before his fall. I accepted, curious about how it would feel to walk the campus that represented his lost potential. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in the same lecture hall where he'd once studied, addressing a packed auditorium about perseverance, success, and overcoming family obstacles. My brother attended this university, I told the students. He was supposed to be the successful one, the golden child, the legacy my family built their hopes around. But he made choices that destroyed his future, and I made choices that built mine. The difference wasn't talent or intelligence. It was discipline, self-belief, and the willingness to work for what I wanted, even when no one believed I could achieve it. A student raised her hand. Do you think your brother's fate was karma? I think my brother's fate was consequence, I corrected. Karma implies cosmic justice. What happened to Marcus was simply the natural result of his choices. He took dangerous drugs to enhance his performance because he was desperate to maintain his golden child status. Those drugs destroyed his brain. There's no mysticism there, just cause and effect. But doesn't that make his story sad? It's incredibly sad, I agreed. A wasted life is always tragic, but it doesn't negate the years he spent being cruel, taking what wasn't his, or dismissing other people's dreams. Tragedy doesn't erase someone's actions. It just means they paid a high price for them. The students were quiet, processing this. The lesson isn't that you should be cruel to people who hurt you, I continued. The lesson is that you don't owe your success to people who dismissed you. You don't have to make them proud. You don't have to include them in your victory. Your triumph is yours alone, and you get to decide who deserves to share it with you. The applause was thunderous. At 45, I received a call from the facility where Marcus lived. He'd had a stroke, minor but significant. He was declining, his already damaged brain struggling with this new insult. He's been asking for you, the nurse said. He doesn't remember much, but he knows he has a sister. He keeps saying your name. I should have felt something. Guilt, compassion, obligation. But all I felt was tired. I'll think about it, I told the nurse. I didn't go. 3 weeks later, they called again. Marcus had passed away in his sleep, his damaged brain finally giving out. My mother called me sobbing. Lily, please, come to the funeral. We're all that's left of this family. I went, not for Marcus, but for her, because despite everything, she'd tried in her limited way to make amends. She'd never fully understood what she'd done wrong, but had acknowledged it. That was more than nothing. The funeral was small. My parents, a few distant relatives, some staff from the facility. Marcus had no friends. The drugs had isolated him long before they'd destroyed him. Standing at his grave, listening to the generic eulogy from a priest who'd never known him, I felt a profound emptiness. Not grief. I'd grieved the brother I might have had years ago, just emptiness. He'd wasted his life chasing validation through chemicals and performance enhancement, never realizing that real success came from discipline and genuine effort. He'd mocked me for dreaming, never understanding that dreams backed by work were more powerful than arrogance backed by nothing. And now he was gone, and I was here, and the universe had balanced its scales. At 50, I published my final novel, The Last Word. It was a meditation on legacy, family, and what we leave behind. Critics called it my masterpiece, the culmination of a career spent examining human relationships with unflinching honesty. I dedicated it to Margaret, my grandmother, who'd passed away the year before. To the family member who saw me, I wrote, "Thank you for showing me what love could be." The book won every major award. At the ceremony, accepting my final prize, I looked out at the audience and thought about the girl I'd been in 2 lifetimes. Overlooked, dismissed, invisible. I spent my first life believing that being seen by my family was the key to happiness, I said in my acceptance speech. I spent my second life learning that being seen by myself was enough, and now at the end of my career, I understand that being seen isn't what matters at all. It's seeing clearly, understanding who deserves your energy, who's earned your trust, and who you're better off leaving behind. The crowd stood, applauding. My brother laughed at my poetry, I continued. He told me I'd never be a real writer. He was wrong, obviously, but more than that, he was irrelevant. His opinion didn't determine my worth. His dismissal didn't prevent my success. His existence in my life was ultimately meaningless, except as a lesson in who not to become. I held up the award. This is my last novel, and this will be my last public statement about my family. I've spent 50 years telling my story, examining my wounds, sharing my truth. It's enough. I'm done. To everyone who's been dismissed by the people who should love them, you don't need their approval. Build your life anyway. Succeed despite them. And when you do, you get to decide if they deserve a place in your victory. More often than not, they don't. I left the stage to standing ovation. I'm 70 now, living in a house on the coast of Maine, writing for pleasure rather than publication. My books are still read, still taught, still beloved. My legacy is secure. My father passed away 5 years ago. My mother followed last year. I attended both funerals, said polite words, and felt relieved when they were over. Sometimes I think about Marcus, not the cruel brother who mocked me, but the damaged man who lived out his years unable to understand what had happened to him. There's a kind of tragedy in that, a waste that serves as a cautionary tale. But mostly, I think about the girl with the purple notebook, the one who died at 23, unloved and unmourned, the one who got a second chance and used it to become everything she'd dreamed of being. I write for her, for the version of myself who needed to be seen, who needed to matter, who needed proof that she wasn't delusional for believing in her own worth. And sometimes, late at night, I pull out that old purple notebook, the original one, somehow preserved through rebirth and time. I read my teenage poetry, the words Marcus once mocked. They're not bad. They're raw and earnest and full of the kind of emotion that can't be taught. They're the foundation of everything I became. "You were wrong, Marcus," I whisper to the ghost of a brother I barely remember. "I was a real writer. I always was. You just couldn't see it." The ocean waves crash outside my window. Somewhere, my books are being read by people who'll never know the full story of how they came to be. That's fine. The books speak for themselves, and that's enough. After 55 years across 2 lifetimes, I've learned that being extraordinary isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And I did. Every single day, I proved that the girl they dismissed was worth more than all their approval combined. Marcus laughed at my poetry, but in the end, I had the last word, and he never got to read it.